So, James, a big thanks to Trevor, one of our listeners, for pointing us to this week's second story. Every so often, we come across a story that is just an absolutely bizarre head scratcher of a situation. And this one involves possibly Bristol's most annoying and controversial boat, which somehow has held up the redevelopment of an old warehouse or a pair of warehouses for, as far as I can make out, 18 years.
Sorry, 18 years it's been delaying things. So you could literally have a child, watch it grow up, send it off to university in all the time it's taken, and still this development hasn't happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's old enough to have opinions on Twitter, basically, and it's still not done. So the story starts at the O&M sheds on Welshback. So Welshback is part of Bristol Harbour, right? It's a quay on the River Avon that's been an important dock since around the 14th century. It's called the Welshback because apparently it's where all the Welsh people came when they were coming across to England. And the O&M sheds are a pair of big derelict warehouses, fairly low, a few stories high, that were owned by the council. And at the turn of the century, they're slowly falling into ruin. So the council wanted to redevelop the site as part of their wider regeneration of the harbour, turning it into a hub for leisure and restaurants and trendy wine bars, that sort of thing.
Do you think in 1350 or whatever, the English were getting very angry about all the small boats of Welsh people coming across or something like that?
Almost certainly.
So Martin, so now I guess this must be a pretty city centre location. I've been to Bristol. It's lovely. You're quite close to the water there. You can have a walk around and see some massive old boats, and there's a nice museum down there. So this must be quite a nice location to build some stuff and regenerate.
Yeah, it's a prime location. It's literally walking distance from Bristol Temple Meads station. It's on the harbour, as you say. There's stunning views. There's just one tiny, tiny little snag. And when I say tiny, it's roughly 137 feet long.
Oh, that's actually a surprisingly big boat, Martin. I thought this was going to be like a rinky-dink little canoe or something.
Yeah, so it's a massive Dutch barge that's parked up in the quay, or moored, as I believe it's called in the case of boats. And if you look at reporting from the early 2000s, it's euphemistically described as a local landmark. But we're not exactly talking about the Cussys Ark, right? It's fairly, an eyesore. It's parked in front of these warehouses, and the council at the time are trying to get developers interested in this plot. But every time they speak to a developer, it's like, yeah, we like the site. Shame about the giant boat that's parked in front of it, kind of slowly disintegrating. Can we maybe do something about that? And so the deals just keep falling through with all these developers.
Martin, I can't claim to be sort of a nautical expert, but I'm pretty sure that boats can move, can't they? Can't they just row the boat or push the boat to somewhere else?
Yeah, so you would imagine that they would just take the boat and move it out of the way and that would be fine. But there's a problem. The boat is inhabited by a local woman, and it turns out that she has a permanent mooring agreement at this exact spot in front of the warehouses. And it turns out that the Ebenezer is a good name for the boat because this woman is a bit of a shark and is not going to be moved without a giant stack of cash. So in about 2007, the council start negotiating. This goes on for about 8 years, back and forth. And by 2015, they're still at a complete impasse.
I'm already thinking about the time. So just to level set on this, 2007, that was what, Tony Blair in power. Everyone had a Nokia. Nobody knew that Donald Trump, this reality star, would soon be the worst person in the world. And yet it's still going on. So that was just 8 years in. And by 2015, you say nothing had happened. That's still a very long time for nothing to happen.
Yeah, and in this time, it's becoming more and more urgent that these warehouses get redeveloped because they're degrading. They're pretty old, like industrial buildings. They weren't built particularly well in the first place. And, by this point, there's a massive crack in one of the walls. And the council are in a bit of a tricky situation because if they can't offload the buildings and get them redeveloped, they're responsible for making sure that they're in a fit state and structurally sound. And that could cost them hundreds of thousands of pounds in repairs. So they managed to strike a deal with Caldwell, who are a property development company based up in Shropshire, I think, who come in and they say, yeah, we'll build a food hall and restaurants and lots of other trendy things for hip young people to go to. And the deal is basically if Caldwell can fix up the building and deal with all of that side of things and pay the costs to make it structurally sound, the council promise, yeah, we'll get rid of that boat. It won't be a problem.
But what you're saying is, at this point, they still don't have an agreement with the woman on the boat to actually move her boat?
No,
Even
no, it's just a tiny, tiny outstanding problem that's currently 8 years in progress. And so they signed the deal with Caldwell in 2017, which is still 2 more years after they start talking to those guys. But of course, now they're in the worst possible position to negotiate because now, if they can't move the boat, not only do they still have to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds to make the building safe, but they've also screwed up a deal with the developer for the site. And A, that means they haven't got a developer anymore. B, it probably means all sorts of legal issues and other problems. So they're now between a rock and a hard place, or between a degrading warehouse and one woman. And so this drags on for 2 more years. And in 2019, finally, they hurled just an absolutely gigantic bucket of cash at this woman to get her to leave. And this isn't just for the boat, it's for the permanent mooring rights as well. So it's a fairly large chunk of money.
So, how much are we talking, Martin? Because I know when I say to my partner, whenever we're on holiday or whenever we're on a trip or something, we encounter difficulties, I always just say to her, solve the problem with money. If you encounter difficulty, and it's an emergency, just solve the problem with money. So I'm guessing, is that what they did here? How much money did they solve the problem with?
£1.4 million. Which fair play. This was a smart woman who played her hand extremely well, and I hope she's enjoying her new life in Tahiti or Hawaii or the south coast of France, whatever she's done with the cash. Like what an incredible deal. She should be negotiating for the council, not the other way around.
Where was she during the Brexit negotiations?
Yeah.
You know, it's like so. Where are we up to now in the story, Martin? She's got her 1.4 million quid. Is anything being done? Yeah, has anyone started digging anything or shoveling or screwing or I don't know quite what construction terms to use, but surely some work was happening.
Well, so they've still got to move the boat, right? So this is 2019. The negotiations originally started in 2007. So we're now 12 years into this saga and about 5 different councils by this point. And the council now own a boat, which is not something that they ever particularly wanted to do. And not only that, but they haven't really thought about what they're actually going to do with this afterwards. And just to reiterate, this boat is 140 feet long, right? You're not just going to stick it onto a trailer and tow it away somewhere. It's like a whole thing that they've got to deal with somehow.
So could they not just sink the boat maybe and turn it into an artificial coral reef? I've seen lovely videos online of how people will sink boats and then you've got all these little tiny microorganisms swanning about around them.
I mean, that would be a great idea if it was out to sea where, you want a coral reef and not in the middle of a quay in Bristol harbour. But they have various plans, right? So originally they say, okay, we'll just move this a little way up the harbour and we'll turn it into a floating restaurant. But unfortunately, the place they want to move it to is basically in the middle of some houses, like it's a residential part of the quay. And this barge is a massive eyesore. And so there's a huge protest from NIMBYs, which, in fairness to the NIMBYs in this case, I think is fairly justified. Like nobody wants a 140-foot long boat parked in front of their house that's falling apart. So instead, they're like, well, we don't know where to put it, so we're just going to park it a little bit further up in front of Bridge Quay apartment building, which is home to some of the richest people in Bristol. And it goes about as well as you'd expect. It's almost literally the worst place you can imagine to put this thing if you want to piss off influential, wealthy people in Bristol. And so the council say it's fine, it's just a temporary thing. It's not a problem. And they say, we're just going to leave it there for a moment. And then we've got a much better idea, which is that we're going to move it to Temple Quay, which is another part of the water next to Bristol Temple Mead Station. And this is a fantastic location. If you put the boat there, it's attractive to developers, so somebody could buy it and develop it, and you've got maybe a nice restaurant or a bar right next to the station. And there are no residential people around to object to it, so it's a perfect solution, James.
Problem solved. I assume this happened, but this must have happened, Martin. We could go to Bristol right now and go to a lovely bar on the barge.
So it's a nice theory, James, but it's not quite what happened because it turns out that between Welshback and Temple Quay is Bristol Bridge, and the boat wouldn't fit under the bridge. So then they had to go to plan B, which basically was just to leave this boat parked outside this posh residential apartment building indefinitely.
They fly tipped a boat.
Pretty much. Exactly that. Yeah. It's like we can't take it anyway, so we'll just leave it there and just hope nobody notices a 140-foot boat parked in front of Bristol's poshest building.
As I am of the left, Martin, I raise my fist in the air thinking, yes, you stick it to them for being wealthy. But no, so I take it now that the boat's out of the way, these warehouses, back to the warehouses, they're getting redeveloped. Presumably they're being brought back to life. Something amazing is going on there. New facilities, new businesses, new restaurants and nightlife opportunities are being created around the lovely Bristol quay.
Nope. So that's not happening either. So if we rewind to 2017 again, so just after the council have struck the deal with Caldwell, but before they've managed to shift the woman out of the boat and, as you say in your words, fly tip it, Caldwell put in a planning application for the development, which makes sense because the council have just asked them literally to build a development there, and the council themselves have paid 1.4 million to get the boat out of the way so that this can happen. And so Caldwell put in the planning application and the council refuse it. Just
what? Martin, is this a real story or a grotesque parody of the sort of things we talk about on this show?
No, I absolutely promise you. So despite the council's own planning officers saying the development should go ahead, a bunch of elected councillors basically go rogue. They say that the development would detract from the character and appearance of the site, which, let me remind you, is a derelict industrial warehouse that is literally falling down. They say that it could make it harder for boats to moor nearby, despite the fact that there's a 140-foot Dutch barge blocking the entire area that anything could moor on. And they're concerned, best of all, that it might violate the human rights of the woman who lives on the barge, despite the fact that she's about to be made a millionaire.
That's insane, Martin.
Yeah. So the developers now have to go to the government planning inspector, and basically they sue for this thing to go ahead. The planning inspector comes down like a ton of bricks on the council and basically says not only that the development should go ahead, but awards costs against the council. So now, not only have the council paid all this money to move the boat out of the way, they've also been sued by the developers, and now they've been forced to pay costs on top of that to allow this development to go ahead somehow.
The mind boggles, Martin. So please tell me, after all of this, what are we, 18 years on or something like that, you said? After all of this faff, after all this money, please tell me that the building is now finally going ahead, and I want to visit this and see the new bar or whatever the hell they're building in that place.
Yeah, I mean, if it's ever built, I'll take you for a drink there, James. We'll have a pint. The good news is that as of 2025, so 10 years after the deal with Caldwell, 18 years after they start negotiations about this sodding boat, development has finally actually started.
So I think I'm more relieved than anything at this point, Martin, but hang on, where's the boat? We still haven't figured out what the final destination of the boat is. So is that still somewhere? Is that still in front of the apartment building?
Sadly not, James. So the council had big plans for this boat. They were going to turn it into a restaurant at one point, as we've said, or perhaps sell it off to developers to at least recoup some of the millions of pounds that they paid for it. But it turns out that if you own a boat for 5 years and you leave it parked up or fly tipped in front of a random residential building and you don't do any work on it or maintenance on it, it falls into a state of disrepair. And in December of last year, 2024, it was finally declared unsafe to be moored at the harbour. And so this put the council in another pickle, which is that, well, we didn't really want to have to do anything with it, but now that it's unsafe, we actually have to dispose of it. So the council have been forced to take it to Albion dry docks, and it's being what we can euphemistically call recycled, i.e. broken down into bits of wood, which apparently the council say are going to be used somewhere else. But, I don't know what they're going to use a load of wet rotting wood for. Maybe they'll come up with something.
So that's 18 years it's took to this point where we've got a development that might just be starting and then a boat that is now being dismantled. That's mind-blowing. 18 years, that's more than 18% of our lives, in all likelihood.
Yeah, and there's still no completion date for the development, right? So fair play to Caldwell for actually sticking around and trying to deal with this at all, because honestly, everybody involved at Bristol Council sounds like a colossal idiot.
But not the woman with the boat, Martin. She's got her 1.4 million quid and she's just
Yeah.
laughing.
She's a genius, and honestly, I hope she's living her best life. And if you're out there and you ever hear this podcast, please get in touch. Maybe sponsor us. but like, what a woman! What an amazing story.